Evening. It is good to be here tonight, good to be home, and good to be back with home folks. I always have trouble with this thing, where to put it. I was afraid I'm going to mess with it. We had a good summer series, and we weren't here, but I was able to hear Brother Gilreath last week close us out on a high note. Did a fine with that. So I'm very thankful for all of those who took part in that. I'm thankful for our elders. We do this every year. The elders have helped us to select topics. Even sometimes they entrust me usually to get the speakers, but they also give me some feedback sometimes of different ones, and so I'm thankful for that. And every year, even though I missed a lot of the summer series, I feel like I don't get to hear as much of it as I would like. I do enjoy, where is my clicker? I do enjoy that each year. Tonight, of course, begins well, it doesn't begin, it's the first Wednesday of our fall quarter. So we are going to, this is always a struggle for me, the Wednesday after summer series, because summer series, usually you've had a lot of variety, a lot of different speakers, and it's always, I've never been, at least the time I've been here, I've never had a bad summer series. They're always really good, and so, you kind of feel the pressure. What am I going to teach? So we don't, try to avoid a big drop-off after the summer series. And so what I've decided on is something that I have been thinking about for some time, and I've mentioned this a lot to you all, the Bremen people here, but it's last time I was at the Biblical History Center. They've changed the names recently. I'm trying to think what it was called. I think the first time I went, it was called Explorations in Antiquity. Now they've changed their name. It's just simply called the Biblical History Center. I really like that title better, just simply because it's easier to say. I don't know if it's necessarily a better title, but it's a lot easier when you're trying to tell people about it to say Biblical History Center. But the last time I was there, I went with Cliff Goodwin when he was here for our spring meeting. Cliff and his family, and Dave Leonard, the preacher at West Georgia, and his family went down there with us. And when I was going through the gift shop, I had never noticed this before, but they actually have a book. There's no PowerPoint. I don't know if my... All right, so Brian doesn't have a PowerPoint. That's okay. I've got it on my iPad, so I can pull it up. It may not have synced for some reason. Do what?
Go try to sync it.
Yeah, it's actually, my computer's unlocked if you want to take a look at it. I don't have a ton on the PowerPoint, but some maps and a few things that hopefully will help you. But as I was saying, the last time I was there, I went into the gift shop and was looking around, and somebody there, one of the employees, pointed out this book to us. And when I got to looking at it, I've been there now 3 times. This was my 3rd trip. And I began to realize this book kind of takes you through if you do the guided tour, what the guides take you through. Some guides give you a little more detail than others. My favorite is a fellow named Vern, and he's just unsurpassed of all the people that I have had the opportunity to listen to take you on that guided tour. And so some of this even doesn't cover as much as Vern will give you if you get to take the tour with him. But between Vern's tour and this book, I thought, you know what, I really would like to share some of this with the congregation, because some of you have had the opportunity to go, some of you have not. What I would like to do, if we can work it out, if we can arrange it, is maybe when we're done with this study, set up a field trip, and we'll try to go down there, those who can, and that way, if you can't, at least you get what hopefully will be the next best thing with seeing some of this, and we'll probably go even beyond some of this in our study, because it's a lot of Bible geography. So I guess if somebody says, what are you teaching this quarter? I guess if you pin me down, I would say we're looking at Bible geography. But there's actually, even more. It goes beyond that. But very interesting stuff. This is going to cover a lot dealing with the shepherd, the farmer, and the village. And if you go down there to the Biblical History Center, you'll see that's how it's set up. And that's the reason I say, if you pin me down, I would call it Bible geography, but it's going to be a little bit different because a typical Bible geography study center, you'll talk about the mountains, you'll talk about the valleys, you'll talk about the rivers, the seas, and so on. All that will be incorporated. Most of that will be incorporated. But I'm going to kind of follow their guideline because, again, if you get to go on that trip with us, and if it works out where some people say, I just can't do that date, I'm very much open to try and take another. I told somebody if I can go 2 or 3 more times and listen to Vern, I can go give a guided tour myself. I'm getting there, but I'm not quite confident enough in my memory at this point to do that. You can go and just walk through. And so that's what, if I get to that point, I could take people down there from the congregation, teenagers, young adults, whatever, and we can go down there and I can just go through and explain everything. But, again, I've got to get to that point. And it doesn't cost extra to do a guided tour. Rob Whitaker and I just kind of stumbled upon that when we went down there. We were not going to do the guided tour. It doesn't cost extra, but you have to have a reservation. So we said, we didn't feel like we had time to make the reservation, or we didn't know if they would be able to get us in, spur of the moment. We get down there and the lady says, there's a group that several people didn't show up, so if you want to go, just jump right in there. And we did, and it was Vern. And that was my first experience with the place, and it was just really, really wonderful. So anyway, I'm going to follow kind of their guide, and I think that'll help if you get to make that trip. But even if it doesn't, you can kind of sort of follow this. I like the way theirs is set up, and this book is really well done. I don't know if you can get this anywhere but in their gift shop. I imagine you could probably get it somewhere. I've not checked, but if you're interested, we can check on that and see. But the guy who actually is listed as the author of the book is James Fleming, and he's an archaeologist. His degree is EDD, a Doctor of Education. That is right. So he's got his doctorate in education, but he's done tons of archaeological work. He's been in Palestine for long periods of time on archaeological digs, had the opportunity to see some pretty fascinating stuff. I wish I could remember, maybe some of you who have been with us and might remember from this particular trip could remind me and jog my memory. He was on an archaeological dig there one time and they discovered something. I cannot remember for the life of me. It may have been something to do with the wall around Jerusalem or something, but they were not allowed. There's a great Muslim presence there, of course, and there's a lot of territory that goes back and forth between Muslims and Israelis. So anyway, long story short, you can't even see it now. He's the only person, and whoever was with him on the dig, that saw it. Muslims have control of that territory now, and of course they're not letting anybody because it's considered a Christian or Judeo-Christian type of landmark, so they're not letting anybody in there to look at it or whatever. So anyway, very interesting fellow. I've never had the opportunity to listen to him. He does come to the Biblical History Center from time to time and do lectures on archaeology and things like that. I really, really would like to go and listen to that sometime. But the book he's put together, the Biblical History Center that he's put together, he helped kind of spearhead that. There were some donations, a lot of different donations. It's not run by members of the church, but very, very interesting as far as Bible archaeology. I've had one experience where a guide tried to insert several times premillennial type theory into the premillennial false doctrine. It's not biblical, into the tour. But other than that one time, everything is just strictly centered around Bible history and Bible archaeology, and it's fascinating. But what we're going to look at tonight, kind of to lead into this study, then before we begin talking about the shepherds in Bible times, we're going to look at what Dr. Fleming in his book calls he says we need to characterize the stage and the broader scene changes. 5 geographical varieties. And so that's what we're looking at tonight. You see here, geology is the first of these. And Brian, what I will probably do, did it sync up? There's another PowerPoint called Maps.
Oh, I didn't get that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. And we can do that next week. That's not a big deal. I've got a whole separate PowerPoint that what we'll do is, when we get that synced up and get it available, we'll toggle back and forth between where you can see some of these things on maps. But as far as geology, and I've got to readjust to having the PowerPoint back in the back. I've been gone a lot during the summer. There's a Syrian African rift that runs right, basically through the middle of what would have been ancient Israel. This is the longest geological scar on the earth. You have plate tectonics that will cause compression. That leads to geological faulting. And it's interesting because there's actually some scriptural mention. Now, sometimes the scripture will talk about an earthquake, but there actually is a very specific one. I need a volunteer to read from Amos. Amos chapter 1, verse 1. Y'all don't want to listen to me read all these verses, so I'm going to need volunteers. Thank you, Bob. I was about to say, not everybody at once. Amos 1:1. I need another volunteer for Zechariah 14, verse 5. Zechariah 14:5. Brother Chris, all right? Go ahead, Brother Bob.
The words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake.
All right, let's go ahead and get Zechariah 14, then we'll make some comments on that.
That you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach Azal. Yes, you shall flee, as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with him.
All right, so there was an earthquake, and it was apparently a pretty significant earthquake. It was so significant, Amos uses it in dating his prophecy. He says, look, this was 2 years before the earthquake. Sometimes that happens even now. We may say, I was describing something to someone the other day, and we were talking about it was something involving an airplane, air travel. That's something that would never happen today. You can never get away with today. And somebody kind of was taken aback by that. Like, no. And I said, well, now keep in mind, this was before 9/11. Well, what are we talking about when we say that? Well, September 11th, 2001, the largest terrorist attack ever on American soil. Most American lives lost. I think the death toll reached I think it was well over 3,000. We understand. If you are in Tuscaloosa and you mention, well, that was right around the time the tornado happened. People know. Back in 2011, there was just a devastating tornado. Hackleburg, Brother Roger, your brother was preaching in Hackleburg at the time that hit. Places like that, people, you sometimes use that dating. It was so significant. Well, this earthquake, we don't know a whole lot about it. And you may recall that when we studied the minor prophets, Zechariah and Amos, we mentioned this. But it was something that was so significant that they used it in dating Amos's prophecy. And Zechariah says there's a judgment coming that's going to shake the earth. You thought that earthquake was bad. Well, this is a figurative shaking of the earth that Zechariah is talking about, but he uses that to kind of drive home the enormity of it. So we don't know exactly what that was, but this is an area where the geology lends itself sometimes to earthquakes. There's an upward lifting of the land. Again, these shifting of tectonic plates and such. It leaves a variety of geological strata exposed. You have granite, you have sandstone, limestone, even occasional basaltic lava flowing from volcanoes and or fissures. So this is some of the geology of the area. Again, some of this we're covering just very much in a nutshell, and some of it we'll talk a little bit more about as we get into it, but you kind of want to understand these, as he puts it, the 5 geographical varieties in the land of Israel, where 99% of what you're reading about in the Bible takes place. And hopefully one of the things that you'll see as we go through this, I was telling Dave and Nikki and Cliff and Beth when we went down there the last time, and we actually had a different tour guide, but when we got to the end, we still had to go through the Hall of Artifacts, and the guide that had taken us through the rest of the outdoor portion of the museum, they were going, I'm trying to remember if it was a he or she, I think it was a he, he was going with a high school group to do the biblical meal. And that's one of the things you can do there, was going to do the biblical meal. And so he says, oh, look, I'm sorry, I can't take y'all through the Hall of Artifacts, but it just so happens Vern is here, and he's got some time, so he's going to take you through. Well, I'm going, yes, because I knew Vern was the best one. And so he took us through there. But I kept telling Dave and Nikki, he has an expression that he likes to use, and it's so true. He'll tell you something about the geography, the geology, or just the day-to-day life of these people. One of these artifacts talk about that. But he has an expression he'll say all the time. He'll say, does it come off the page for you now? Does it come off the page for you? And what he means by that is it's not just stories on paper. It's realizing that this is real. This really happened. This is how these people lived their lives. And it seems so far away and so distant to us sometimes, but it was everyday life for them. And so some of these things, when you begin to study them, you realize, okay, it does. It comes off the page. And hopefully that will be the case for you as we go through this. All right, let's talk about the elevation here. The elevation in Palestine is varied. I mean, there's a lot of variation. In the north, you have snow-covered Mount Hermon. Somewhere, I've seen statistics say, some sources say 9,200 feet at the peak. Some sources say 9,500 is what Dr. Fleming's got in his book. I've even seen some that say upwards of 10,000 feet at its highest point. The mount called Mount Hermon is actually 3 mounts. Somebody want to grab Psalm 89, verse 12? This is just a kind of a reference to the snow-covered, just about year-round snow that lies on Mount Hermon. This is kind of the northern boundary of Israel. When we get that map, I'll show you, and you'll actually see Mount Hermon is even north of the city of Dan. And sometimes in Hebrew history and sometimes in Hebrew literature, you'll see a reference made from Dan to Beersheba. Brother Richard Curry taught us Bible geography. We were one of the last classes at Memphis School of Preaching that he taught before his mind just got to where he couldn't teach anymore. But Brother Curry loved that expression. And you'd better know that if you were in his Bible geography class. The northernmost boundary, city-wise, was Dan, and the southernmost was Beersheba. And so it became an expression among the Israelites, from Dan to Beersheba. Same way we say in America, coast to coast. We use that expression quite a bit. Well, they use that expression, Dan to Beersheba. Psalm 89, verse 12, who's got it? Okay, Brother Allen. Tabor and Hermon. Is there another verse there? It talks about I was thinking there was something. I may have gotten the wrong verse there. I was thinking there was something about the dew. I must have got the wrong verse there. Anyway, there's a reference. I think it's in the Psalms. I must have just, I may have done a search and was looking at the wrong Psalm verse when I saw Hermon. But anyway, there's a reference in Scripture, and I think there's more than one actually, the dew from Mount Hermon. But, coming from the snow, when the snow would melt. But again, this is the northern boundary. It's even north of the city of Dan. And it's about 40 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. In fact, if you just wanted to look, if you've got a Bible, a lot of Bibles have maps in the back, and you can see that. Pretty much any, whether you're looking at New Testament map or an Old Testament map, patriarchs, probably not going to see it as well in a patriarchal, but like I've got one here on the conquest of Canaan, and I see Dan, but it doesn't go quite north enough to see Mount Hermon, or maybe it's just not labeled. I see what probably could be a mountainous formation there, but anyway, if you got a map, you may be able to see that. It may not go quite north enough to see that, but when I get that map, we'll take a look at it and see that. So it's about 40 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. Again, it's when you talk about the peak of Mount Hermon, you're actually talking about 3 because there are triple peaks, and there's a verse in Psalm 42:6. Let's go to that one. Get somebody to read that. Hopefully I got the reference right this time. And I'm going to get somebody to, well, who wants to read that? Let me get a volunteer to read it. Oh, thank you, Caleb. Hold your spot there in Psalm 42. Let's go. Caleb found the verse I was looking for. I did have the wrong reference. It's Psalm 133. I must have just written down the wrong one. It had Herman in it. It's talking about, it's a very short psalm, and it's dealing with unity. We often quote verse 1, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." He says, "It's like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard that went down to the skirts of his garments." Now, notice verse 3, Psalm 133. "As the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion, for there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore." The dew of Hermon, often referred to, would seem to be a reference to the snow caps, and when the snow melts, of course. And it also supplies a lot of mountains, rivers, brooks, and things like that as that snow began to run off in the spring and summer. So, thank you very much. I need to make a note of that because I wrote down the wrong reference. And then who's got Psalm 42?
Oh my God, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore I will remember thee from the land of Jordan, from the heights of Hermon, the hill of my law.
All right, from the heights of, what does it say there?
The heights of Hermon,
Hermons.
hill of my law.
Hermons, plural. Did you catch that? Now, the King James has Hermonites, but it's really more accurately translated, I think, what is that, New King James? Hermons. And the reason for that is triple peaks. It's more than just one peak there. So the mountains, you might say, or Hermons, as the Jews use that expression. But Mount Hermon is so, and those three peaks are so prominent, but especially the biggest, the highest peak, that if you look north anywhere in Palestine, I'm told you will see Mount Hermon. If you look north from anywhere in Palestine, I'm going to say that right. I'm told that you can look and see Mount Hermon. Now, you go less than 100 miles south. You go about 40 miles south, as we already noticed in this first little subpoint, you arrive at the Sea of Galilee. But less than 100 miles south, you arrive at another famous spot in Palestine. What is it? Yeah, and you talk about 9,500, which, compared to some of the mountains on earth, is not the highest peak. But 9,500 feet above sea level, that's a pretty good height, right? Almost, yeah, you're getting toward 2 miles. Less than 100 miles, you arrive at the lowest spot on earth that you can walk. And that, of course, is the area we often refer to as the Dead Sea. By the way, you won't find it in Scripture as the Dead Sea. That term came to be used later on. In Scripture, it's called the Salt Sea. It's actually called by other names, but that's probably the one that we most recognize. Genesis 14:3 is a reference to it as the Salt Sea. That's just one of several references where it's called the Salt Sea. It came to be known as the Dead Sea. Why? It's dead. I mean, that's what it is. And it's dead because it is so salty. Now, this is not table salt, of course. It's I forget. I looked at one site today and I found the breakdown of all the different chemicals. It's a lot different, but this was not like sodium chloride. It's a different kind of salt. There is sodium, there is chloride in it, but it's a lot of other stuff as well. But it's so salty, basically, that you've probably heard people talk about floating. You can float so easily. You can't sink if you wade out into the Dead Sea. You're just not going to sink. It's just so dense. But it's called the Dead Sea because nothing can live there. The saltiness, it has no outlet, which also makes it unfit to sustain life. There are no fish living in the Dead Sea. They can't live there. Sometimes you say, well, what about the river the main river that flows into it is what? The Jordan River, right? And this is one you can definitely see if you got a map in the back of your Bible. You can follow the Jordan River right down to the Dead Sea. But sometimes people say, well, what about the Jordan? I mean, it's teeming with life. It is. But you know what happens when that life hits the Dead Sea? It gets dead. It gets dead because it's the Dead Sea. Now, there are some animals that live around the Dead Sea, like a kingfisher type animal, something like that. And what they do is they often wait for the fish in schools to enter into the Dead Sea, because then they're easy pickings, because they're just going to die. But it can't support life because of the salt. The salt content is so high. It's 1,300 feet below sea level. So you're almost 10,000 feet above sea level at Mount Hermon. Less than 100 miles south, you are now 1,300 feet below sea level. Again, it's the lowest point on Earth that you can walk around. The sea level continues to drop, Dr. Fleming points out in his book, during the approximately 250 measurable earthquakes per year. The plates move along the geological faults there in the Dead Sea Valley, and it actually will, sometimes the sea level will continue to drop. It's pretty amazing due to those earthquakes. Between these two extremes, you're going to find a lot of gradual rolling hills, valleys. There's a lot of beauty in the land of Palestine. There's a lot of fertile soil in the land of Palestine as well. And of course, this is why often in Scripture God's referring to giving it to Israel. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's very fertile, very beautiful. And people to this day make trips over there. And some people want to go and they want to see Bible lands. Some people don't care anything about seeing Bible lands. But they say, man, it's magnificent scenery over there. And it is. It really is amazing. One of the more remarkable characteristics over there is some of the cliffs that cut through the landscape. And not only that, these cliffs and mountainous regions have been used throughout history as a stronghold, a hideout for revolutionaries and others as well. Let's look at some scriptures here. Genesis 19. I'll get Genesis 19 if I can get some volunteers for some of these other ones. Can I get a volunteer for Joshua? I'll go grab Genesis 19. All right, Bob. Joshua 10, verse 16. And then 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. All right, Joel. And 1 Kings 18, 4. Okay. Let me get to Genesis here. In Genesis 19, in verse 30. Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. He's escaped the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He fled into Zoar. He was afraid to stay there. Probably felt like he was a little too close to all that destruction and just scared. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would have been like to have experienced the destruction of a city as Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. And so he's afraid, and he goes up into the mountains and just finds a cave, and he decides, I'm just going to hide out in this cave, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, right? Lot, he was a just man, the Bible tells us. That's why he was spared in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But it's ironic that he just saw the destruction of the city for their wickedness. He was spared by God. God sent angels to make sure he wasn't destroyed in it. But now he's afraid, so he's going to go to the mountains. If God wanted you destroyed, Lot, he would have gotten you with Sodom and Gomorrah. And number 2, where are you going to hide if God wants you destroyed? Number 3, he just sent an angel to rescue you. He's not going to destroy you. But anyway, I imagine if we were in Lot's shoes, we might have been afraid too. But I just find that kind of ironic. Hindsight's 20/20, right? When we're looking back on that, if we were in the same situation, we might have been scared to death too. Joshua 10, verse 16. Brother Bob, you got it? These kings, they formed an alliance, and they decided they're going to go after Joshua and the Israelites. They're going to go on the offensive and try to resist them invading the land of Canaan. Of course, God had given them the land of Canaan. There was no resistance that would have worked for anybody. They could have had 5 kings or 5,000. But upon their defeat, these 5 leaders, they decided, we're going to hide out in a cave. Of course, the text goes on to tell that the people came and told Joshua they're hiding in a cave, and they put stones in front of the cave so they can't get out until they finish the battle, and then they come back and deal with those kings. 1 Samuel 22, verse 1.
David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him.
David's on the run from Saul, King Saul, and so he runs and he escapes into one of these caves, Adullam, and he hides out there for a time at least, and even has a chance to kill Saul later on. When Saul comes with his men to the cave, and he didn't do it. He of course, said he wasn't going to raise his hand against God's anointed. But he's hiding out in a cave, and there's a couple of different psalms where you'll see it's a psalm written by David when he was hiding out in the cave. So again, David using these caves, and then 1 Kings 18:4. I think Martin has it.
So it was while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hid them, took them to a cave, and fed them with bread and water.
Jezebel is massacring the prophets of God Almighty. And so what does this prophet named Obadiah do? Not the Obadiah we think about when we think about the minor prophets, a different fella. But Obadiah takes these prophets and he hides them in a cave, so they could escape the wrath of wicked Queen Jezebel. So a lot of elevation there. You've got the highest point, Mount Hermon. You've got the lowest point, the Dead Sea. And then you got a lot of in between, and of course the mountains will be famous for becoming caves and strongholds and hiding spots. And in fact, you get on down even to the 1940s, and there's just going to be an earth-shattering discovery in one of those caves. Where was that located? Qumran, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls. Little shepherd boy's just tossing rocks inside of a cave, and he hears something shatter. It's pottery. He goes in there, and there are all these clay pots that are filled with scrolls. And of course, those are the Dead Sea Scrolls, just a groundbreaking discovery as far as confirming the Old Testament text that we have is in fact the same as it was 1,200 years ago with the Jews. It was just an amazing discovery. A lot of people thought it was just going to completely change the text of our Old Testament, the books in the Old Testament. It's going to be so different, and what it turned out was exactly the same. Let's talk climate in the Palestinian region. Clouds generally will cross the land from west to east in Palestine. The high elevations get drenched with rainfall. The clouds, they're clouds, of course, carrying moisture. There'll be condensation of moisture in the air while they're rising across those cooler elevations. But as the clouds then go across descending terrain, you have warmer air that causes those clouds to dissipate. And what these 2 points here result in is a wide variety of rainfall within a very small area. A lot of times when you're looking at it in one of those maps in the back of your Bible, you don't understand, at least I never did until studying some Bible geography, how small this area is in comparison. In fact, I would like to, if I can remember, I'm going to try to see if, I don't know how I would find this, maybe a Google search might turn it up, but I wonder what the comparison might be to a state or states in our union as far as land area of the country, the region of Palestine. I don't know what a comparison might be, but I'd like to see that because it's a very small area. It's somewhere around, it's in here, I didn't put it in my, it's somewhere around 150 miles by 50 or so. That's a pretty rough estimate, but something like that. And so it's a pretty small area, but a lot of variety of rainfall. Generally speaking, in our country, you find that type of an area, 150 by 50 miles, it's going to be pretty similar rainfall and even climate probably. But you see the great height at Mount Hermon, the depth there at the Dead Sea, so it's going to produce a lot of variety. But some mountainous areas in the north average anywhere from 40 to 60 inches of rain per year. But then you have some deep desert canyons in the southeast that literally get just a cloudburst or two per year. And that's it. I mean, that's how much variety there is. 40 to 60 inches per year in one area, next to nothing in another. You've got desert, you've got this great fertile area that gets all this rain, almost like tropical, but it's just the terrain. And so the climate can vary a lot. In fact, high elevations can be below freezing in the wintertime, get down easily below freezing. Low elevations may exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. A lot of variety there. Were you going to say something? Mm-hmm. 115 miles. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, if you have a device or smartphone or something, you can look at Google. You can download the Google Maps app, Google Earth. That's it, and you can just type that in. You can see that map and see kind of what we're talking about. You can even go point to point. Oh, look, somebody sent me. Looking at Palestine, it fits easily within the range of Great Britain. Great Britain's not a very large country. I'm gonna hang on to that. Thank you, Miss Stephanie. I'm gonna hang on to that, and I can save that image and put it up next week and show folks. But yeah, Google Earth is a very good tool. I didn't even think about that. If you got that, you may just, and you can type that in. You can see it. You can go from point to point, and it'll tell you the distance. It said it's about 115. That's from Mount Hermon to the Dead Sea, right? As the crow flies, about 115 miles. So very interesting. I didn't even think about that. That's a great idea. Google Earth is a great little app, and you can pull that up and see very easily some of what we're talking about here. But you see the climate change. Yes, sir? About the size of Vermont. Okay, thank you. So about Palestine area will be, as far as square mileage or whatever, of course, different shape, but about the size of the state of Vermont. Wow. I mean, that's exactly what I was looking for. That gives you some perspective. It's not that big. I mean, imagine going from well below freezing in the winter in some spots, upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer in some spots. Some spots getting 40 to 60 inches of rainfall, some spots getting almost nothing. All within an area that's basically the size of Vermont. That's pretty amazing. But you see a lot of different climate in the area. Let's talk about the vegetation. Oh man, 5 minutes. I got to get through this section. Vegetation. You've got cold and wet areas in the northwest. You've got warm and dry areas in the southeast. We talked about that already. This results, of course, in a great variety of plants. There are what is often referred to as the 7 species. These are major plants that were honored by the rabbis. The 7 species are 2 grains and 5 fruits. You got wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, dates, and olives. We've talked before extensively about olives, even looking at that in a sermon. The Mishnah said that only the first fruits from these could be brought into the temple to be offered as the first fruits. Now that's the Mishnah. That's uninspired. That's the rabbi's commentary on the Torah, which was Genesis through Deuteronomy. But that was kind of their tradition. Only those first fruits could be brought. Most consumption in Palestine centered around these, what are often referred to as the 7 species. The desert also has plenty of vegetation. We'll talk a lot more about those 7 species when we get into talking about the life of a farmer, because obviously they're farming these 7 species. The desert has plenty of vegetation as well. Just a couple here. Acacia trees can have roots that go up to 100 feet deep. Where do you reckon you typically find those? In those drier regions, right? What's probably the most famous object constructed from acacia wood? I hope you know this, VBSers. The Ark of the Covenant, right? Overlaid with pure gold, but it was actually made from acacia wood. This is and many times in the King James referred to as shittim wood. But it's acacia is how we would refer to it. And I think the New King James and all the newer versions have it listed as acacia. There are these rhodum bushes, if I'm pronouncing that right. We just often refer to them as broom trees, but the King James calls them juniper. And if you've ever read that and thought, I know what a juniper tree looks like, and this doesn't sound like juniper to me. Well, it's different. The King James is using an older word, and we've kind of changed how we use that. But these juniper trees, as the King James calls them, are really broom trees. They're pretty common. Look at 1 Kings 19. I'll get the reference in Psalms. I'm still there. Somebody. I'm racing the clock here. Psalm 120, verse 4. I was thinking 6. Psalm 120, verse 4. I'll read while you're getting to that other reference. Sharp arrows of the mighty with coals of juniper. Coals of this broom tree. It was often used for burning and charcoal, that kind of thing. 1 Kings 19, who's got it? What'd I say, 4 and 5? Yes. Okay, Brother Martin.
But he himself went a day's journey to the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. He prayed that he might die and said, "No, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Rise, eat."
Okay, so New King James, it's got broom tree, which is more accurate how we would say it. Here are those 7 species. I found a picture, kind of put them all together like that. And again, we'll talk more about those later on. This upper left one, I'm told, is, and there are the 7 species with, I assume that's Hebrew. It might as well be Greek to me. Although I could actually read the letters if it was Greek. I couldn't tell you what it says, but I could read the letters. Oh, it does have a footnote, juniper. This one up here, I'm told, would be more the acacia type tree. And this one, they say, is a broom tree. They look very similar to me, if you want to know the truth about it. So I'm wondering if, I depended on Google Images for that, just to get an idea of, I like to see something so I can kind of have a better idea. So, but anyway, yeah, those are 2 of the prominent trees. And then let's close out and talk a little bit about animals. This is the shorter of the points. Again, you know, there's a lot of variety. High and low temperatures, cold, warm, wet, dry, a lot of extremes, a lot of vegetation. We already mentioned that. We just hit on a couple of those, but there are a lot. A buddy of mine that in fact, somebody was looking at just recently in my office, written a book, Herbs in the Bible. It's just focusing on the herbs. So a lot of vegetation. We just touched on a couple of those. But this results in an environment that's fit for a variety of animals. There are 2 major bird migratory paths that go across the land, so you have over 4 dozen species of birds that are mentioned in the Bible. Ancient Israel served also as a land bridge between Africa, Asia, and Europe. We often think about the pastoral desert animals. We think of camels and donkeys and you know, that type of creature. But there are also some extremely rare animals like the predatory caracal. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, but I just realized I didn't get my picture in there. That's the end of my slideshow. I had a picture of that joker. Anyway, I'll show you. I'll try to remember to get you a picture of this creature because he's very interesting. He has these like tufts of hair on his ear, and it looks like he's got these evil-looking horns. But a lot of different animals in the region as well. Covering those 5 geographical varieties, that kind of sets the stage as we go into this study and begin looking at the life of a shepherd, which we will do, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you for the feedback, helping with the verses and the also the other stuff, the Google Earth mentioned and all that. I appreciate that. That's all very, very helpful, and I'm looking forward to this study. Thank you very much.